This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Oh, we've got a loaded show for today, that is for sure. Welcome, everyone. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. We are here every Monday and Friday on YouTube and Rumble to host 2 weekly shows. If you are checking out the show for the first time, make sure you subscribe, comment, and rate for me. Each Monday and Friday, we bring you wrestling recaps and discussions from AEW Dynamite and Rampage to NWA Powerrr to our weekly retro review series shows of NWA World Championship Wrestling on the Superstation and World Class Championship Wrestling. So you're kind of getting the whole gamut of the wrestling library right now. If you are also interested in wrestling article content, you can check the description box for my work publications that I write for the Chairshot website, or you could head on over to www.chairshot.com, click under the opinion tab, and my work is always labeled under the name Star. As noted, today's a fairly lengthy and big show, as we've got the usual rundown of AEW Rampage and NWA Powerrr for the Monday podcast. But we are also using this show as an extension of the Retro series to discuss the entirety of Starrcade 1985. And again, you can come back and check out the Friday shows each week for the episode discussions of NWA World Championship Wrestling from 1985 and World Class from 1982. Those are the starting points that we've been working through the archives. And we're just kind of slowly working through the library from there. But before we get into that, we will begin with the usual rundowns of Rampage and Powerrr, and then we will close out the show with the Starrcade recap. And we will start with Rampage from November 26th, which honestly should not take me all that long to recap. This was a nothing happening show with, quite frankly, a lot of the undercard talent that I have very little interest in. Opener was Adam Cole and Bobby Fish taking on Wheeler Yuda and Orange Cassidy. And I can only presume that Tony Khan is in ultimate trolling mode right now, because I have been advocating since his debut that Cole needs to desperately distance himself from the Bucks if he ever wants me to take anything he does seriously in AEW. And I guess Tony heard me project this concern and said, "Hold my beer, I've got an idea." And now he has decided to associate Adam Cole with a whole other set of clowning goofballs, this time in the form of Orange Cassidy and the Best Friends. So, fuck you very much for that one, Tony. I mean, I could go into a whole ranting spiel if I wanted, but I already knew what I was getting going in, and boy did they not shy away from making a sheer mockery out of this one. We had the obligatory stupid shit with Cassidy trying to put the hands in his pocket so he can jack off with himself. There's a part in the early stages of this match where Yuda and Cassidy were double-teaming Fish, and because Cassidy's mission in life is to do everything in his power to expose the wrestling business altogether, he does the slow, lethargic spring off the ropes and falls down on top of Fish with a, quote, splash, and Yuda did some kind of backsplash on the other end. Cassidy was absolutely intolerable in this match, and more so than usual. And, you know, I had kind of been under the impression that they were sort of backing away from the over-the-top Cassidy shenanigans. Guess I'm still giving AEW too much credit there. And, that's honestly probably why I legitimately got pissed off watching this match. We had more stupid shit at the end there. Yuda eventually tagged in Cassidy's foot, and he ended up getting in there and doing every fucking low-rent indie PWG match you've ever seen, where he just starts hitting series of moves. Just one after the other. It's move, 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 move. None of it meant a goddamn thing. Cole and Fish deserve Emmys for trying to make chicken salad out of the chicken shit they were dealt with in this match. And a bunch of stuff happened at the end. As per the usual AEW formula of tag matches, all four guys just end up getting in there and doing moves at random, while the most useless referee in professional wrestling history, Rick Knox, stands by and lets it all go down. You got fucking Cole and Cassidy brawling on the outside, and Knox is just standing there watching. Everyone's just doing their ring around the rosy, take turns, hit moves on the other, to the point where I completely lose track of who the legal guy is supposed to be. And God knows the ref can follow it well enough to figure it out. I will at least say the finish was cool, with Fish hitting Yuda with the top rope Falcon Arrow for the 3. But that was easily one of the worst 15-minute opening segments I've seen on an AEW show in quite a while. Everyone involved in agenting and putting that match together should be immediately fired. Orange Cassidy continues to generate more go-away heat with me every time I see him, and I can only hope and pray to God that they don't actually try to make this into a long-term program. So that's what I got out of the opener. We had a Tony Nese interview with Tony Schiavone, and if there is a God, hopefully it will be the last Tony Nese interview we ever see. He wants a match with Sammy Guevara for the TNT title, to which my notes immediately follow up with, oh great, another AEW debut where the guy's first match is taking a clean loss in the middle of the ring. Oh yeah, and speaking of the TNT title, remember Jay Lethal? The guy that made his big debut at the pay-per-view and had a great TV match with Sammy for the belt a week ago? No mention of him on the show on Friday night. Yes, after one match, he's already just another guy. Just another random name amongst the 150 plus groups of names they've already got under contract. Way to go, guys. You managed to make Jay Lethal a jag after one match. That takes some real skill right there. So then we had Riho versus Britt Baker, where I think if Riho won, she got a future title shot or something. And I already know Cornette's going to have a ball with this one, so I don't want to fully steal his thunder. Of course, that is if he ends up actually watching the match and not fast-forwarding through it. God, I forgot how ridiculous watching Riho work was. All because her and Kenny were boinking one another did I have to endure an entire year of Riho getting shoved down my throat as one of the top female athletes on the roster. Criminal. I'm sorry, it's just fucking ridiculous. I cannot watch a Riho match without laughing at this point. It's ludicrous. She's 5 foot, probably 90 pounds at the most. She looks no older than 14. Her ring attire is absolutely ridiculous. Like she's getting ready for after-school ballet class at the local dance studio. I just can't take it seriously. And, Brit's not an Amazon or anything like that, but seeing her in there struggling to wrestle and take down Riho, it's implausibly laughable. Like, she towers over Riho by at least 6 to 7 full inches. She outweighs her probably a good 20 to 30 pounds easily. Seriously, it has been so long since I've watched a Riho singles match, I forgot just how totally absurd it is watching her have competitive matches with the other women. And the fact that she was the first AEW Women's World Champion and like the sole focus of that division for an entire year. God, no wonder people make a mockery of the women's division in that company. And I kid you not, when she rolled up Brit at the end and pinned her clean, I lost it. I was rolling on the floor, tears streaming down my face. Honestly, I do not remember the last time I laughed so hard watching a wrestling skit. Probably not since the infamous Lex Luger Elizabeth skit on Nitro, where the camera crew forgot to shut the camera off before they ended the skit. So we just see Lex and Liz visibly laughing at the script and the production staff talking off set. It's on YouTube if you don't know what I'm talking about, and if you want to go watch it, just Google search Lex Luger Elizabeth backstage Nitro error. I like how that's the title of the video too, error. Like, I'm just thinking in the back of my head, you motherfuckers signed Ruby Riott to a contract. You've got Serena Deeb and Thunder Rosa as the two best female workers in that division by a country mile. And, you know, I'll even throw Sheeta in there too. I mean, I'm not her biggest fan, but, you know, she's had a couple good matches here and there. And even after all that, we are once again going back to the well with fucking Riho. Dude. I mean, I know she's not winning the belt, but come on. Like, I've seen enough Britt Baker placeholder title matches now. If the end goal is to get the belt on Rosa, can we just hurry up and get there already? Like, I'm all for the slow burn build in wrestling, but if the sacrifice is having to sit through a bunch of mediocre women's title matches to get to that point, it's overstaying its welcome. We'll just leave it at that. And I'm sorry, you know, if my Riho commentary is coming off as irrational, but understand that I have watched professional wrestling for a long time now. I have seen plenty of great female athletes in my time, and I can assure you that among those names, Riho is at the bottom of the barrel, least credible women's wrestlers I've ever seen in my life. You want to put her in the ring with Marco Stunt? Okay, I will at least give her a fighting chance. But if we're going to even attempt to pretend that there's any shred of reality to this business in 2021, Riho beating Britt Baker clean in the middle of the ring is doing nobody any favors. Well, it was a rough 30 minutes to get to this point, but the main event was Daniel Garcia versus Eddie Kingston. And while I cannot say that these two saved the show entirely, they at least made the show not a complete waste of my time. I've said this before, man. I like Garcia a lot. I wasn't sold on the whole 2.0 alliance at first, but you know, having Parker and Lee in there as the background flunkies while Garcia is the guy that kind of gets the central spotlight of the group, I think it works. You know, they're a solid undercard faction. They come off wacky in their promos, but they also have quality, serious matches in the ring to back up the goofiness. And you know, that's all I ask for when guys are doing the over-the-top cartoon personas. If they can at least go out there and do something resembling professional wrestling, I'm okay with it. You know, of course, Eddie Kingston, I mean, what more can you say about him? Yeah, ever since that Punk promo, that dude's been on a roll. I'd even say shortly before that when he had that great tournament match with Danielson on TV. But there was a lot of good stuff in this match. It had some Street Fighter elements to it, which I can't really say video games are my personal flavor of match, but it fits the mold of Kingston's ring style. You know, Garcia worked over Kingston's knee for a lot of the match, which Kingston sold very well. He ended up firing back on Garcia at the end, including a deal where he dropped Garcia on the back of his neck with some overhead suplex throws, which, well, hearing Ricky Starks on commentary calling that really didn't sit well with me. But they end up getting into the slugfest toward the end, and Kingston ended up giving Garcia a back fist for the knockout blow. And, you know, it was out of nowhere, but I dug it. This was a very different kind of AEW match that we don't see a whole lot of. Kind of came off as one of those technical shoot style matches, but They also made sure that they did everything to make it look real. I watched this match and nothing looked blatantly fake or planned out. I think, who did I say Garcia reminds me a lot of? Was it Zack Sabre Jr. I said I got a lot of vibes from? I think it was. Yeah, he's one of those guys where he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's very skinny, but his stuff looks good. He's very intense. And, even going up against a bigger guy like Kingston, I never got the sense that I couldn't buy into what he was doing, if that makes sense. It was far more believable than fucking Riho Brit Baker, where, the size difference is completely preposterous to buy as legit. So I ended up enjoying this main event a lot. Enough to save the rest of the show? No. And, as far as the whole post-match deal with Jericho running down to make the save, of course, that fucking asshat's going to try and be the center of attention at the end of the night, but whatever. And, I think this will end up being one of those Rampage recaps that really put into perspective just how one-sided and in the tank a lot of these media outlets are for AEW at this point. I'm sorry, but if you came out of the show thinking this was a great show, I don't even know what to tell you at this point. Other than the fact that I think it's best that you remove the blinders and try to actually see the reality for what it is for a change. Kingston versus Garcia was a solid main event match. But aside from that, this was a rough hour to get through. And I've been stating for a while now that, Rampage is usually good because even if I may not be a fan of all the content on the show, it usually never feels like the show drags at any point. This one was not one of those cases. This show dragged. When that Riho Baker match was going on, I cannot tell you the amount of times that I was constantly checking my phone for the time to see how much time we had left in the show. And by that point, we were probably maybe a little over a half hour into the whole show, and I was already getting fatigued. Yeah, this was not good. And look, I get it. It's the holiday weekend. You probably had a lot of people out of town. The show's probably going to do a bad number regardless, so I can understand the idea of not wanting to throw too much at the wall this week, figuring the viewership was going to be down anyway. So, okay, they phoned it in for this one, fine. But can we at least come to some sort of genuine consensus that this was not a good show? Maybe at least try to hold AEW accountable for a change? Give them some sort of impression that we expect better going forward? I know that's a lot to ask of all the AEW nut huggers to remove themselves from the AEW man cave for a moment to actually call out the bad stuff when they see it, but to me, anyone that came out of the show saying it was great are just living in a completely distorted world at this point. And that transitions us over to NWA Powerrr from November 23rd, I believe. Yeah, November 23rd. Sorry, the dates always kind of get screwed up because I'm reviewing the show several days afterwards, and I know they tape a lot of these shows out of order anyway, so it's really hard to get a clear-cut idea of what the actual date is for these episodes. And as Joe Galley directly informs us from the beginning of the program, we are edging closer to hard times, and tonight we are here to bring out all the stops. So many innuendos to be had, but we won't even bother. I am kind of contemplating right now how I want to break down my overall thoughts on this one because, well, I'll just put it this way. NWA Powerrr episodes are usually not bad shows. Yeah, there might be a couple things here and there that I'm not too fond of, maybe some promos and angles that I don't find all that good. But generally, I do not feel insulted watching this show. The whole mantra of the NWA reboot from the beginning was to bring back some of those old school pro wrestling tropes that we really haven't seen in a lot of years, and try to bring back the show to some of its more traditional territorial roots. And while I wouldn't say NWA has fired on all cylinders when it comes to that in the last couple of years, they have at least gone out of their way to try and format and present a different kind of pro wrestling show to the public. I think it's kind of disappointing that they've gotten away from the studio setting in recent times, but credit where it's due, they have at least attempted to present the show as this is real professional wrestling. Generally, they have stayed away from the sports entertainment garbage and all the bad indie crap that makes professional wrestling look fake and dumb. Then I watched the show, and we'll get to that segment I'm talking about later on, but suffice it to say, it was a segment that, if it would have ever been brought up in a meeting by a booking committee back in the day, the idea alone would have been enough for Jim Crockett, Bill Watts, and Dusty Rhodes to hang their hat and walk out of professional wrestling altogether out of pure embarrassment. And if you aren't sure as to what I'm referring to, stick around because I'll get to it in a while. Opening match for the show was scheduled to be Chris Adonis taking on Pope in a non-title match, but Pope ends up coming over to the interview booth to inform us that he had been approached by someone to take Pope's spot in this match in order to seek revenge on Strictly Business. And if you've been watching the show consistently, it probably didn't take too long to put two and two together. Sure enough, Nick Aldis ends up running down to face Adonis instead. And as Nick Aldis runs out from the back for this match, the booker of the show, the man at the commentary booth at this point, who is calling the action, just casually goes, well, not what I had initially planned, but works for me. All right then. So they had a match, and it's perfectly fine. I've seen many a Chris Masters / Chris Adonis matches in my time, and while he's got the body of a chiseled Adonis statue, he still has the personality of tree bark all these years later. And they did some stuff for a while. Tom Latimer ended up coming down to scout, I guess. Ended up trying to run interference at the end, which lit a fire under Corgan's ass for some peculiar reason. Almost as if he's never seen a run-in his entire life watching wrestling. But Adonis got a near fall at the end, ended up going up top for some kind of drop kick, but Aldis caught him in the cloverleaf and forced a submission. And we come back from the break. We had Billy Corgan coming to the booth to lay down the law to Mr. Tom Latimer. He was miffed that Latimer would dare try run interference in such a classic singles match between Adonis and Aldis that he called out Latimer from the back like he was scolding his son, told him to get in the ring by the count of 5, otherwise he'd be fired, and told him he's going to wrestle right now. Actually, more accurately put, he was told that he is sending someone out to, quote, kick his ass. And I kind of figured maybe he would have sent one of the bigger guys out to rough him up a bit and teach him a lesson. No, instead he sent out the ultimate jobber of all jobbers, and Latimer ends up having an impromptu match with Heartthrob Jaden, a man who I can merely refer to as a close resemblance to Joey Janela if Joey actually worked out and had a good physique. And, well, it ended up being unintentionally funny because the whole point of this was to teach Latimer a lesson, and the lesson ended up backfiring on Corgan because Latimer pretty much kicked Jaden's ass from bell to bell. I just kind of got a kick out of the fact that the entire story here was centered around the fact that Latimer kills this guy for like 5 minutes, and all the while, he keeps looking over at Corgan at commentary, who goes, yeah, like it's my fault or something. Yeah, Billy. In fact, it is kind of your fault. You're the one that booked Latimer to have a squash match to begin with. Did you really think that he was going to have a problem beating the piss out of Jaden Waller, of all people? So Latimer kills him with a pile driver, gets the 3, and now that was pretty much that. This didn't seem like a proper punishment I think Corgan was expecting. So they aired a quick card pre-tape for the Hard Time show. Oh yeah, and Mick Foley's going to be there. Just figured I'd mention that in passing, much like the NWA did. Oh fuck, here we go. We had the match. Okay, so Taryn Terrell comes out to the commentary booth. And I was already about 3 seconds away from hitting the mute button, but I figured, okay, hold on. I read the promotion for this Taryn Kenzie Page match is a social distance match. I have no idea what the fuck this could possibly turn out to be. Chances are it wasn't going to be good, but I wanted to at least hear her out beforehand. So she starts talking about how they're in St. Louis, Illinois, and that she knows they have a mask mandate still in place. And yes, St. Louis, Illinois, because you see, Taryn's gimmick is that she's a fucking idiot. Cool beans. So, in order to comply with state regulations, she is now taking the initiative to book this match with her and Kenzie to be contested under social distance rules, which sounds like something I'd expect to see on a GCW Outlaw show in front of 25 people in a bar, but discounting that for a minute, I have another important question. Why was Taryn allowed to rebook a stipulation match on the fly when Corgan was sitting right there on commentary? Why did Corgan allow Taryn to add the stip? Does he just give such little fucks about Taryn Terrell at this point that he just figures, whatever, let her make a fool out of herself and get her off the show as quickly as possible? Perhaps so. And I will say from the onset, Taryn did a great job in the opening 5 minutes of this segment exposing just how ridiculous the whole masking deal has really been from the jumpstart of this whole pandemic. The fact that she was literally just squealing and screeching dialogue next to Kyle Davis at the booth less than 10 seconds earlier, well within 6 inches of his face, much less 6 feet. Apparently it's impossible to catch COVID from the commentary booth on this show, but in the ring, God damn it all, that's a fucking germ factory right over there. It also was not explained how Taryn and Kenzie were the ones that had to mask up in this match out of fear of catching the bug, all the while nobody else on the show has a problem wrestling without a mask. Only explanation I could think of was that neither chick is vaccinated. I'm pretty sure I just saw Kenzie wrestle a match not that long ago maskless, and she seemed fine. Taryn, I don't remember the last time I recall watching her work a match, but I can guarantee it's been within the last fucking year. Pretty sure the mask mandates were in place well before that. But whatever. It gets worse, people. I'm only just diving into this. So they get in the ring. And Taryn pulls out a mask from her tights. Of course, it's not an N95 mask or, something that may actually have some way of preventing germs from making contact with your nose and mouth. No, and instead it's one of those goofy cloth masks that probably explicitly reads in the packaging, this mask is not a certified protector against the COVID-19 virus. And I would know this because I bought 8 or 9 of the cool-looking design cloth masks with the understanding that they weren't solid protectors against COVID, but I just wanted to expose how pointless the mask mandates were from the beginning just to piss people off. Because I like doing that. So they both put masks on, and you see, people, the gimmick of a social distance match is that you can't make contact with the other individual. You must pretend that you are locking up with the other wrestler. Like, you know when we used to trampoline wrestle as kids, and whenever we would go to throw punches or kicks, we would make sure that we were like well within a foot of actually making contact because we weren't trained professionals and we didn't want to actually end up breaking someone's jaw or something. Well, in this match, with trained professionals, allegedly, who were not on a trampoline and were being filmed on camera for a wrestling audience, they proceeded to do fake wrestling. They threw social distance punches. They did a social distance lockup. They did social distance stomping and kicks. And if that wasn't bad enough, even worse, they sold it. Like the fucking Invisible Man was in there running interference the entire time and the ref never saw it. They're taking bumps. They're selling shots. And if it wasn't bad enough that they already had Taryn playing into this, Kenzie Page was selling this bullshit. Which made absolutely no sense at all, considering that she seemed going into the match that she was shocked about the whole social distance stipulation to begin with. Yet in this match, Taryn would give her fake punches and slaps to the face, and Kenzie sold it. What the fuck? So, long story short, people, I'm watching this with my jaw agape. I'm completely baffled someone actually signed off on this to actually take place as part of the tapings. And to make matters worse, after Kenzie broke kayfabe and started laying in real fake punches, as if to, expose the business even more, I guess, Taryn got pissed off. She no-sold everything, stomped over to the booth, and started, I guess, squealing something about how Kenzie's not playing by the rules, and at that point, I fucking muted this shit and had to walk away from the show for about 10 minutes to regain my composure. Someone's got to show this to Jim Cornette. I refuse to go on watching professional wrestling after the show without getting some sort of input from Cornette, watching two wrestlers do everything in their power to expose the business. I will tell you, I have seen a lot of awful women's matches in my time. And if you have watched my recaps consistently, I would not say I've been particularly forgiving of a lot of bad women's wrestling matches I've reviewed in 2021. There is a difference between reviewing two terrible green female wrestlers having a bad TV match versus two terrible wrestlers having a horrible attempt at a comedy match that is purely designed to expose professional wrestling and make it look as fake and scripted as humanly possible. This almost made me want to forgive every bad thing I've ever said about an AEW women's match. That's how desolate this was. I don't even recall the last time that I legitimately had to walk away from a wrestling show out of pure anger. I don't think I've done that watching an AEW show yet. I've been close a couple times, but actually leaving the show to take a walk and get some fresh air before coming back to watch the rest of the show, I don't remember the last time I had to do that. Well, except for this past weekend when I watched this episode of Powerrr. This was bad. Not even good, redeeming quality bad. Not even so bad it surpasses that and becomes funny by comparison bad. No, this is just bad television. This is turn the channel heat. So, after I came back, I flipped a coin to decide whether or not I wanted to continue torturing myself with the rest of the show. I think I said heads being yes and tails being no, and it landed on heads, so I stuck the course for the remainder of the program. But I will say this. I can promise you going forward, I will be boycotting any and all of Taryn's segments, matches, or promos. Likewise, I will be boycotting anything I ever see Kenzie Page do on this show again. Taryn's had get off my TV heat with me for a long time now. You know, well before I even saw her in NWA. I never thought Taryn Terrell was any good. And people that are going to sit there and talk about that instant classic she had with Gail Kim in TNA years ago, fuck off. Seriously. She's always sucked. You know, and I don't even want to bring up her past with Drew McIntyre because that's an entire different discussion. But she has now given me the perfect reason to never want to watch anything she's ever affiliated with this show again. So, from one individual colleague to another, thank you, Taryn. You made my life a lot easier. So then we had JTG and Colby Carino taking on the Rude Dudes. And I was already in a foul mood after having watched that god-awful Taryn match, but I tried to remove it from my memory and go into this match with a clear mind. It didn't work. I was essentially playing catch-up notes from the previous match, and I missed virtually everything that happened here, and I have no idea who won. And quite frankly, I don't really care enough about any of these four guys to go back and find out, so just skipped over that one entirely. We had a promo with Jax Dane before the main event. And essentially the idea here was that Kyle Davis informed Jax that if he got pinned in the main event, he would lose his future world title match, which Jax referred to as a Corgan conspiracy. Oh yeah, and he also kept name-dropping Crimson as Anthony, because that's his real name. You know, because what is kayfabe in 2021, really? Oh, man. You know, if I didn't know any better, I think Russo would be booking this show right now. And with that said, that brought us to the main event. It's Jax Dane and Jeremiah Plunkett taking on Crimson and Trevor Murdoch. And, of course, as soon as the bell rings for this match, the first thought immediately hit me. Okay, wait a minute. So the stipulation is that if Jax gets pinned or submitted, he loses his world title shot down the road. So why doesn't he just walk out and leave? Just let Plunkett take the fall, you lose the match, but at least you don't have to do the job and you can at least retain your title chance. And again, I know this comes from years of watching wrestling and seeing every loophole in the book get glossed over, but come on, guys. Like, this is a glaring issue right in front of your face that you didn't even bother addressing. Well, as it turns out, Jax did end up leaving, but he ended up leaving in the last minute of the match instead of, right at the beginning of the opening bell. As a match, it was, again, not bad. Plunkett is essentially a job guy in the NWA from what I've seen, so I kind of find it amusing that two of their top guys on the show right now, one of whom includes the world's heavyweight champion, had legit trouble beating Jax Dane in a jobber, but whatever, we'll look over that for now. Jax was also out there wrestling in street clothes for some reason. I don't know why. But the whole deal at the end was Jax tagging back Plunkett, hightailing it away from ringside with Crimson in hot pursuit. And then Trevor made a short comeback on Plunkett and pinned him with a top rope bulldog. All this to set up... I'm not really sure. I presume a rematch with Crimson and Jax? I think we already know Trevor's facing Mike Knox at Hard Times for the belt. So, okay. Anyway, that was NWA Powerrr, and boy was that one an eye-opener. Honestly, I really don't even know what to say about the show overall. I mean, remove the Taryn match for a minute. It was fine. Good, okay show, I guess. But my God, that Taryn match. That honestly might have been the worst women's match I've ever seen. And I'm not joking. Kenzie Page versus Taryn Terrell on the November 23rd, 2021 edition of NWA Powerrr may go down in the record books as the worst women's match I've ever seen. And before you throw the book at me, yes, I've seen Jenna Sharmell. I've seen the Rebel match from a few years ago. I've seen the WrestleMania Battle Royal with Santino dressed in drag. This one might have outclassed them all. Because at the very least, as bad as that fucking Sharmell-Jenna match was in TNA years ago, at least I can say they attempted to look like they were making physical contact. I cannot say the same for Taryn and Kenzie. This was one of those wrestling segments where if you have a significant other or a best friend walk into the room and they see that on TV, you hang your head in shame and wonder why you still watch wrestling altogether. Wretched. I would say that I recommend you watch it just to experience it, but coming from someone who genuinely cares for one's well-being and sanity, I'll tell you, you may just want to pass on it altogether and take my word for it. It was no good. If Jenna versus Sharmell was -5 stars, Taryn versus Kenzie in a social distance match was -6. Maybe -6.25. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to Starrcade 1985, which for historical reference took place on November 28th, 1985. And I do not want to spend too much time going over logistical matters, but I think for contextual purposes, it is important to bring this up as we talk about this retro series content and go through the archives of the pay-per-view content. But the show did take place in 2 separate locations in Greensboro, North Carolina. Approximately 30,000 in attendance for both events, or both locations, give or take a couple thousand. Of course, the attendance and house number is always a huge controversy in and of itself that I really don't want to get into for time's sake, but you could pretty much round it off to about 30,000. And of course, we're referencing both the Omni and Greensboro Coliseum. And the show basically flipped between both venues as the night rolled along, which is a concept that we would see tried in other various promotions down the road. In fact, one taking place less than a year later with the WWF trying something similar for WrestleMania 2. 3 locations, as a matter of fact. For the show, we had Bob Caudle and Tony Schiavone on commentary, with Johnny Weaver conducting interviews at the Greensboro Coliseum. And first of all, let me just say out of the gate, I love being able to rag on the goofiness of pro wrestling, especially when it comes to things like production gaffes and incredibly awkward-looking exchanges with talents. And I couldn't pass up on the opportunity to comment on the absolute sheer hilarity of watching them try and cut back and forth between Schiavone, Caudle, and Weaver in the opening of the show. For those of you that have not seen the show, first of all, if you have the Peacock subscription, just go and watch the first 3 minutes of the show, just for the enjoyment of watching the commentators and the intros here. When they cut the Weaver at the Greensboro Coliseum, you've got to watch his facials the entire time this discussion is going on. Weaver delivers his very uncomfortable, welcoming intros. He caps off each sentence with one of those awkward-looking smiles at the camera, and while there's like the long strain of silence before they cut back to Schiavone and Caudle, you can just see Weaver peering back and forth between the cameraman and the prompter, probably just thinking to himself, are we still filming? We done yet? Meanwhile, there's like a part in there where the camera gets off-centered from the announcers, and they're awkwardly trying to refocus it back to center, and when they cut back to Weaver, the camera's still out of focus. I'm just fucking dying in my chair watching this. I cannot do it justice, people. Just go watch it firsthand, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Just the ultimate definition of whoever was running the production crew at the beginning of the night was clearly out to lunch. And speaking of commentators, I did not write this down, but I do want to throw this out there as well. You know, modern commentary in professional wrestling is, let's just be frank, it's not good. You know, whether we're talking WWE, AEW, it doesn't matter. Professional wrestling commentary sucks today. And, you know, I respect JR, you know, Tony Schiavone. I know he's been doing it for a long time now, but you want a good historical reference just for how great professional wrestling commentary used to be. You need to go back and really hone yourself into listening to Bob Caudle and Tony Schiavone throughout the show. Mostly because it really hit me going back and watching this, just how different commentary used to be back then. You know, nowadays it feels like there's always this constant urge for guys to say something. There has to be this constant streaming motion of verbiage between the color commentary and the play-by-play throughout the night. They can never just let moments speak. There always has to be input with something. Like, everyone has to constantly be talking one and over at some point or another. I'm just sitting there watching this Starrcade show, and Caudle and Schiavone never got in each other's way. They called the action. When there was something to mention of note, they would bring it up. But other than that, most of the show, they just watched the matches as if they were fans. They let moments of silence speak for themselves. They didn't drown you with constant verbiage throughout the night. It was just so refreshing. And really, in a lot of ways, I kind of wish professional wrestling commentary got back to this format. It just felt like a totally different vibe watching the program. And especially when we get to that I Quit Cage match later on. That was like the perfect epitome of this just sticking out to me in terms of the great commentary on this show. Letting silence speak for itself. It's just such a novel concept in pro wrestling that it really just got away over the period of time. And it's really unfortunate. That said, though, we were off to a lovely start, wherein, thanks to the Black Friday Verizon sales plug, I did watch this show on Friday night. I got to watch this event on the Peacock Network with only one commercial break in a 3-hour gap, which, looking back, probably shaved off about 5 to 10 minutes worth of watch time when you piece everything all together. Our opening match for Starrcade 85 is Sam Houston versus Crusher Khrushchev for the vacant Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship, with Pikachu as the referee. And if you recall in my past review session, Sam Houston had wrestled on the main event of the Go Home show and was savagely beaten by Ric Flair right before the show went off air. If I recall correctly, I think he'd given Houston a vertical souffle on the concrete floor. And, well, as it turns out, Houston was perfectly fine competing in this match less than 7 days later. Man must have skin made of iron and steel to be able to withstand such brutality. Anyhow, one thing I did want to mention before I went back and watched this, I wanted to do a little historical catch-up on how exactly we got to the point going into this match where they had to vacate the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title altogether. Turns out the backstory was apropos of a lot of the politics in the business we'd come to expect around this point in time. The former champion was Buzz Tyler, who had debuted for the Mid-Atlantic region in late 84, beat then-champion Ron Bass in early 85 to win the belt, did pretty much jack shit with the belt for the entire year. And by the summer of 85, he had gotten into a dispute with Dusty over pay and pretty much left the company high and dry with the belt still in possession. So going into the show, they basically had to come up with a whole new belt design and everything. And oh, here we are by November of that same year. All because Buzz believed he was owed money. Again, the things that you'll never see in the modern business ever again. Guys refusing to do jobs and hand over titles because they felt they were owed money, so they just walk out with the title still in their possession. I'd love to actually know what the follow-up with that whole thing was, and whether or not Dusty and Crocker Promotions ever tried to sue Buzz at any point, or honestly how the whole thing went down. The match was pretty standard per usual expectations of an opening pay-per-view match. A lot of the early part was Houston playing the cat and mouse game with Khrushchev to try and outsmart him to gain the advantage. Khrushchev took control with some power moves at one point. Houston got some of the hope spots in there and got cut off at various points. Good finish with Houston hitting the patented bulldog on Khrushchev. He thinks he gets the win, but Khrushchev gets the foot on the bottom rope, and of course Houston celebrating like he just won the World Series, ends up getting decked with a sickle clothesline a couple seconds later. And the big fluke finish here is the ref counting the 3 when when Houston still had his foot under the bottom rope. A 1980s travesty of the babyface getting screwed in the opening bout of the show. Or is the plot twist really that the ref was secretly working for the Russians the whole time? Could have been a spy. You never know. Good opener, though. And of course, one thing that became abundantly clear with the show from the onset: when the babyfaces were in control of the matches, the crowd was absolutely electric. And while you may look at this match on paper and think, Crusher Khrushchev versus Sam Houston sounds implausibly boring. Well, if the match took place in a studio setting, yeah, you'd probably be right with that one. But here in the Greensboro Coliseum, this was fucking Rock versus Hogan at WrestleMania 18 with the way these people were reacting. Unbelievable. So then we get the Mexican death match with the Raging Bull Manny Fernandez taking on Abdullah the Butcher. Fernandez, who as recently as this past Friday, I had just reviewed a stellar match that he had with Nature Boy Buddy Landale on the Superstation. And, well, I don't want to alarm you all, but this match he had here with Abdullah was not quite up to snuff with his TV match with Buddy. But he tried. And essentially, this alleged Mexican death match was more just a window dressing mechanism to dress it up as what ended up being a pole match for Manny's sombrero. And hey, I mean, I guess if the idea is to increase ticket sales, announcing a Mexican death match is probably more enticing on paper than a sombrero on a pole match. Figures that by the year 1999, they kind of lost the plot with the whole booking philosophy there entirely, but what can you do? So, we only get a few minutes into this match before Manny bladed, which was soon to be followed by Abdullah doing the same. And again, not to spoil things, but the gig jobs on this show are sort of going to become a running theme throughout the night. All in all, I would classify this match as a perfectly acceptable bloodbath outlaw match. And unlike in the business today, where every hardcore outlaw match is just guys whacking each other and hitting each other with furniture for 20 plus minutes, and none of it means a goddamn thing, this, my personal opinion, is how you do a car wreck match right in pro wrestling. And honestly, how it used to be done before guys started getting too cute with all the ECW garbage and trying to make every modern hardcore match a can you top this version of the Home Alone booby trap skits. But, I mean, ideally, this is how you want to do these kinds of brawl matches. You start slow, you build the intensity and suspense throughout, you make each move and spot more hard-hitting than the preceding one, continuing to build to the climax, and then you do your big finish or big spot at the end and take it home. And in this particular case, the quote climax spot was Fernandez hitting the first flying burrito, but getting cut off initially trying to scale up for the hat. Then he decides to try for a second flying burrito from the top, ends up connecting with it, and right as Paul Jones tries to run interference on the apron at the tail end, Fernandez pretty much Spider-Mans himself up the pole, grabs a sombrero, and hightails it out of the ring, bootless and all. It was fine. I've been on record saying that the street fight mud show match types are not really my cup of tea, but when done right with the right kind of drama and build, see the I Quit cage match I'll talk about later in the show, it can work. And while this was not a masterpiece of amateur athletic skill, it was not embarrassingly bad. Following this, we get a brief Crusher Khrushchev interview with Johnny Weaver to recap his Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title win, of which I did not write a whole lot down, except for a line in here where Weaver had implied that the Russians currently hold, I believe he referred to the Russians currently possessing 6 championship belts. And perhaps my timeline can be off here and I'm missing a title or two, but where exactly did Weaver get this number of championships from? I mean, at the moment, I believe the Russians are the 6-man tag team champions, which, I mean, technically at this point aren't even belts. It's just a giant trophy that they carry around with them everywhere. And I also knew heading into the show that Ivan and Nikita were the world tag team champions, and they were going up against the Rock and Roll Express. But if my math is correct, and I know I'm not a math whiz or anything, but I believe that puts the Russians with a current possession of 3 championships. So unless I'm missing a territory where they were carrying around more belts, I have no idea what Weaver was talking about. Anyway, Khrushchev just took a minute to plug his comrades, says he's going to defend the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title all around the world, and that was pretty much it. I also still can't get over the absolute hilarity of Khrushchev not even attempting a Russian accent at this stage in the game. Like, Ivan and Nikita's accents were always bad, but Nikita was at least entertainingly bad. Khrushchev is just like, fuck it, I'm not even going to attempt that I have any ability to fake a Russian accent. Next match was the Texas Bull Rope match with Ron Bass and Black Bart, with the added stipulation that if Ron Bass wins, he gets J.J. Dillon in the ring for 5 minutes in a bull rope match. This was not as brutally bad as I figured it would be going in. It was merely monotonously boring. About 75% of it was both guys going, I'm going to hit you with the cowbell and you take a bump. And then a minute later, the other guy would go, okay, good deal. Now, I'm going to hit you in the head with the cowbell and you're going to take a bump. And they sort of lather, rinse, repeated the same formula for about 5 minutes until the very end when they both did the double collision spot. And by the way, I must mention this for consistency purposes. This was the second match in a row on this program with double juice. And basically, after building the entire match around, I'm going to clunk you in the forehead with a cowbell, the genius finish idea they came up with here. Get ready for this. You ready? Ron Bass gets up on the second rope, and he did the unthinkable. That's right. He clocked Bart in the head with the cowbell off the second rope and pinned him. And again, I know it's hard to imagine this, but keep in mind this is the year 1985 when the fan base was totally different from today. Despite the very boring layout and structure of the match, the people loved it. And immediately after the bell, JJ wastes no time getting the hot jump on Bass. He ends up removing his shirt, which I do not know if this is copyrighted or not, so if it is, they can sue me. I really don't care. J.J. Dillon topless equals no buys. But they did the momentary bit of heat where J.J. got the few cheap shots on Bass once the ref got him attached to the other side of the strap. Bass ends up making a comeback with J.J. doing the begging, pleading deal on the mat, which, I mean, never gets old in wrestling, especially with the heel managers. Of course, J.J. gigs after the first cowbell shot. So that is now 5 wrestlers in a row we've seen on the show doing blade jobs. If you didn't know any better, you'd probably figure you were watching an ECW pay-per-view at this point. And the big swerve here at the end was right as Bass was looking like he was going to put away JJ. They do the ref bump deal, after which Bart immediately hits the ring, plants Bass with a pile driver, rolls JJ on top of Bart, and the ref counts 3, which the fans were none too happy about. As noted at the beginning of the segment, I was going in expecting something along the lines of wretchedly bad. It was merely boring. But again, though, trust me, I will take boring hardcore slugfest over the crash dummy 1,000 Ways to Die rendition of hardcore wrestling we get in 2021 any day of the week. Then we had what I think might be the single greatest arm wrestling match I've ever seen in my entire life as a 30-year wrestling fan. Possibly behind the Scott Steiner Triple H arm wrestling bout on Raw years back, because that was pretty damn great too. But for this one, it's the showdown between the Barbarian and Superstar Billy Graham. And of course, the added steps for this one was that the winner gets $10,000. Allegedly. I cannot confirm one way or the other that they actually went through with the $10,000 paycheck, or if they just gave Graham a pay-per-view bonus or something. But the setup going into this initially was that the Barbarian was selling the broken right wrist, which was apparently his, quote, good hand. So we get to the show here, and now Paul Jones wants the contest to be had with both guys wrestling with the left hand. And of course, Billy Graham ain't gonna bitch about that. He tells Barbarian, fine, if you want to claim that your right hand's broken, I'm going to make sure I break your left hand too. I did get a kick out of the angle beforehand too, where Paul Jones went around scouting the table just to make sure it wasn't gimmick to favor Graham. Again, I want to be consistent here. I am on record saying that I was never a big Paul Jones fan growing up, but after having gone back and watched him thus far on these NWA shows, he's been pretty fucking great. I can't lie. So they do the arm wrestling bout, and when I tell you that this arm wrestling contest had people literally screaming with anticipation and excitement, I am not exaggerating. And of course, it's every arm wrestling match you've seen 100,000 times before where the heels start off with the advantage. The babyface looks like he's on the verge of losing, but then somehow miraculously gains the strength from the people's cheers to wheel them through and eke out the win in the end. But like I said, this was an extraordinarily entertaining showdown, and there's a part of me that really would love to have seen a shoot arm wrestling contest between Barbarian and Billy Graham in real life, just to see if Graham would actually win in a strength contest against the Barbarian in real life. My money is still on the Barbarian, but it would still be enjoyable to see. So after Graham wins, Paul Jones cheap shots Graham almost immediately. Barbarian gives Graham the cash shot to the top of the head. And folks, you'll never guess what happened. No, seriously, take a wild guess. Well, if your answer is, did Billy Graham do a blade job? You're darn tootin' Graham did a blade job. So that is now 6 wrestlers on this show in 3 consecutive matches. I think it's a drinking game at this point. Anyway, they proceeded to do the match, which I really even can't say it's much of a match, more so just an extended angle from the previous deal. And it was really not all that good. And right as Graham caught Barbarian in the bear hug and was about to win, Jones runs in, clocks Graham in the face with a cane for the DQ. And I almost gave the lame DQ finish a double Steve Austin salute, but the mere reaction of Paul Jones once Graham grabbed a hold of the cane and turned his direction toward him, absolutely magical. It was like 10 times better than the J.J. Dillon pleading spot from earlier. I honestly can't even put into words, but when Paul Jones went to give Graham the second cane shot, Graham thwarted him and took possession of the gimmick, and Jones knew he was fucked 6 ways from Sunday, he could not have sold this better if he tried. He just quivered his knees in fear, extended his arms out at 180 degrees, mouth agape, slowly shaking his head back and forth, pleading for forgiveness, and eventually stumbling over into the corner where Graham gave him the safest shot to the chest imaginable. It was overacting levels of cartoon comedy, but just fucking great television. God, man, the pop that they got when Graham was stalking Jones with that cane, you couldn't generate that level of excitement from a crowd today if you tried. There was not a single person in the Coliseum that did not want to see Paul Jones get clocked in the head with that cane. Great stuff. And yes, admittedly so, the entire thing was smoke and mirrors to cover up for the actual 3 minutes of bad wrestling we got, but between Paul Jones and his outstanding performance, along with the visual of Barbarian and Graham locking horns in an arm wrestling bout, kayfabe or not, that is something that I would still pay money to see in real life. Up next was the National Heavyweight Championship match with champion Terry Taylor taking on Buddy Landel. Of course, the very first thing I write down in my notes about this match, ring looks like a goddamn crime scene at this point in the show. Just blood patterns spewed all over the place. Disgusting. And again, if you watched the Friday show, I had recapped one of those great Championship Challenge Series matches with Buddy Landel and Manny Fernandez, with Buddy being the highlight of the entire match. And again, someone I really truly wish I would have had more appreciation for and got to see actual more live performances of growing up as a kid before he kind of faded out of the picture altogether. Yeah, I know he had some inner demons that he was dealing with, and he was kind of a difficult employee to work with, but yeah, this is another Landel match where you just watch him perform and you can't take your eyes off of him. He's a great seller. He's a great worker. He's got the best mannerisms. He's got that ring presence that you cannot teach to a lot of guys in the business. It is a natural form of charisma that you either have or you don't have. And Nature Boy Buddy Landel, he had that form of charisma and then some. A great professional wrestling match this was. And, you know, very much a stark contrast to anything else we've seen on the show up until this point, including the opener. You know, obviously Landel utilized a lot of Flair's bumps and selling mechanics, but it's funny because we've seen plenty of knockoff gimmicks in wrestling throughout history. And like most of the time you can tell when guys are doing cheap imitations and they just flat out suck. You know, see Jeff Jarrett trying to do the Fargo strut when he broke into the business, thinking he was some new founded incarnation of Ric Flair. Like, that shit just sucked. And everyone knew it sucked. You know, which is why he got booed out of the building most of the time. But I watched Landel's matches, and yeah, his mannerisms are very much carbon copies of Flair's. But his ring work never feels like he works a Flair match, if that makes any sense. I mean, he has his own unique style. He has his own moveset that differentiates from what Flair does. So, it works. But like I said, match was very different from a lot of the other stuff we've seen thus far on the program. Unfortunately, we did get a ref bump here, which, much like the blood thing, came to grow a little old by the end of the show. But that was all done so JJ could get involved. Buddy ends up clocking Taylor with a shoe in the corner for the first inadvertent ref bump. The second of which came off by having him just shove Taylor into the ref. Landel goes to whip Taylor off the ropes so JJ can hit him with the shoe, but Taylor reverses the Irish whip, sends Landel to knock JJ off the apron. And the finish to this match could not have been more perfectly executed if they tried this 100 different ways. It's one of those circumstances where things could have gone horribly awry if they mistimed it in any way, shape, or form. But by God, they pulled this off and it looked awesome. So Taylor picks up Landell over his shoulder to set him up on the top rope for the superplex spot. And as Taylor goes to lift Landell overhead for the big suplex, JJ trips Taylor's foot on the second rope. And I mean, this is so amazing to watch in real time because it's something that could conceivably go horribly wrong if they screw it up. But, Taylor's falling back with Landell in the suplex position. Not only does Taylor perfectly take the trip-up bump, but Landell lands in perfect position on top of him for the pin. It's one of those sequences that you watch back, and the first thing you think as soon as the move occurs, that's it. That's the fucking finish right there. And by God, wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what it was. So, Buddy Landell is the new National Heavyweight Champion, a championship reign that I don't believe lasts all that long after this due to unforeseen circumstances. I'll just leave it at that. But a very good technical match, and while I probably could have gone without the interference on this one, especially when we just saw it in the previous match, it was a very well executed finish. So then we had Ole and Arn Anderson defending their national tag team titles against Billy Jack Haynes and Wahoo McDaniel, which I had absolutely no memory of this, but apparently Billy Jack and Wahoo were the United States heavyweight tag team champions going into this match. Belts that I believe were affiliated with the Florida region at that time. Because again, my timeline could be completely fucked up here, but I don't think the NWA United States tag belts were even a thing until mid-'86, right? Because I remember the national tag titles ended up getting replaced by the U.S. tag titles at one point. But I think the U.S. titles for this match were exclusive parts of the southern region of those territories. I think. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. Believe it or not, considering this was an Anderson brother match, this is probably the one match on the show that I took the least amount of notes on. It was not bad or anything, but I just wouldn't classify it as eventful. And I think that's due in large part to the babyface dance partners they had to work with here. No offense to Wahoo McDaniel and Billy Jack Haynes, but by the year 1985, Wahoo was, I don't want to say completely broken down, but you could tell his better years were behind him in the business. And Billy Jack was fine here, but again, he was never a true mastermind of the business in terms of work rate or star power. They just kind of did a match, and the heels worked over Wahoo for a while. Billy Jack got the hot tag. Of course, Ole and Arn are total bumping machines in this match. And the finish is Wahoo getting tagged back in. Things kind of break down with all four guys. Ref is trying to hold back Billy to get him back in his corner. And as Wahoo backs Arn into the heel corner, he gets tripped up by Ole on the outside, and Arn gets the pin on Wahoo with Ole holding his foot down on the outside. Very similar to actually how the heels won that six-man on the Superstation show a couple weeks back. Like I said, it was just kind of a match. Not bad, but nothing I'd say you need to go out of your way to watch. That said, I will never diminish the quality of true tag team professional wrestling. And God, when I watch Ole and Arn in action together, the only thing I can think in the back of my head is, how in the fuck does AEW have Arn Anderson contracted? Whether he's a talent agent or a coach, it doesn't really matter. You have one of the best tag team wrestlers in the entire business signed to your organization. And every time I watch an AEW tag match, I end up watching a Chuck E. Cheese free-for-all with these tag wrestlers. Does Arn get no input with any of that? Is he not allowed to throw his 2 cents in there? I don't get it. So coming back from intermission, we get this fabulous promo with J.J. Dillon and Buddy Landell, and the recap of the national title win. And in the most unintentionally comedic line here, JJ casually begins the promo with, and I quote, "This is the greatest night of my life." All the while he has this giant tape bandage across his head covering up the open wound. Just died of laughter. I mean, you just think, up until this point in the show, JJ has been through a 5-minute bull rope match with Ron Bass where he got his ass kicked and skull busted open. And then about 20 minutes later, he's out there taking apron bumps trying to help Buddy Landel win the national heavyweight title. He's just like a total pinball on the show by this point. Yet, here he is decked out in his fancy white suit with a huge bandage taped across his head, talking about how this is the greatest night of his career. What a heel. And he capped things off by saying that Buddy Landel is going to be national heavyweight champion for, and I quote here, a long time. Yeah, about that one, JJ. Keep that comment on the back burner, because it'll come back to haunt you. And as we transition over to, I guess, part 2 of the event, we get Tully Blanchard and Magnum TA for the United States Heavyweight Championship, an I Quit match inside a steel cage. A gimmick match inside a gimmick match that, quite frankly, I'm actually kind of shocked we have not seen since then. I do not recall any recent I Quit cage match in professional wrestling history. It's quite odd. Baby Doll looking absolutely wonderful ringside this evening. Anyhow, I will say this from the beginning. I have seen many I Quit matches, and I have seen many cage matches in my time. And I think I've even alluded to the fact that one of the reasons I've sort of come to hate cage matches these days is more so the fact that modern cage matches in wrestling never feel warranted. They never feel like true, genuine stipulation matches. I think we've gotten to a point now where cage matches they're just matches to do. They never feel like grudge blow-offs. They never feel like true culminations to rivalries. And honestly, point blank case is that stupid fucking War Games deal they did with the Inner Circle and the Pinnacle earlier this year, where after the match was over, they continued the feud for another 4 to 5 months, and the blow-off was a one-on-one match with Jericho and MJF on pay-per-view. No added stips or gimmicks or anything, by the way. And, I understand to an extent WWE had sort of PG censor their cage matches over the years because they were trying to disassociate themselves from violence and the intentional blood thing. Age demographic is people 50 plus. But I can outright tell you that having gone back and watched this match from start to finish and understanding the true history and the story in the build-up to this match with Tully and Magnum, I Quit stipulations aside, I can confidently say that this might be one of my favorite cage matches I've ever seen. I've seen Taker and HBK in the first Hell in a Cell in 97. I've seen Foley Taker in the Hell in a Cell in 98. I've seen the Bret Owen cage match at SummerSlam. Oh, fuck, what year was that? Is that 93? 94? I think it was 94. And obviously I've seen the Jimmy Snuka dive off the cage, and people kind of mention that as one of WWF's greatest moments, and I mean, it surely ahead of its time. I've seen a lot of great cage matches before. I've seen a lot of War Games matches before. I just brought up the Hell in a Cell deal earlier. But in terms of like sheer drama and story, I think this Tully Magnum I Quit cage match is right on par among those matches I just mentioned. Obviously, it's not as mainstream in terms of recognition and publicity, but if you show this to a modern wrestling fan, it holds up. At least I think it does. I watched Foley legitimately nearly die on live pay-per-view in that Hell in a Cell match. I 100% feared for the safety and well-being of that man during and after the match. It's still probably one of the biggest roller coaster rides I've experienced as a wrestling fan. But this Magnum Tully match was a whole different realm entirely. Because, you know, in a sense, like, the Foley Hell in a Cell match was him trying to make a statement. You know, that was him legitimately trying to kill himself to get over. Magnum and Tully weren't trying to do that here. They were just taking you on a roller coaster story ride. And this was easily the most captivating match of the night. And, you know, between both guys grabbing hold of the mic and screaming at one another for the other guy to quit, and the other guy would, like, shriek in pain. Of course, he had Baby Doll's reactions on the outside. They're just beating the shit out of one another, throwing each other into the cage left and right. I don't think you could have asked for anything more. You know, we did have the obligatory babyface blade job here for Magnum early on. Take a shot. And like 2 minutes later, Tully's bleeding like a faucet from the arm. Take a shot. But if there was ever a match that they needed double juice, it was this one. Yeah, but generally you could just feel the emotional hatred with these guys. Like, watching this occur in real time, you totally got the impression that these guys can't stand each other. And if it boils down to it in the end, they would legitimately kill each other before the night was over. I do not get the impression watching professional wrestling anymore that we get these kinds of matches. You know, no matter how hard I try to convince myself it's possible. Long gone are the days where beef between guys actually feels like genuine beef and hatred. You know. And of course, as the match rolls along, both guys are exhausted. They're selling the fatigue. They're bleeding like stuffed pigs. We get this amazing finish. Someone throws a wooden chair over the cage to Tully. I presumed it was Baby Doll, but I don't think they actually ever showed who it was on the camera. But Tully breaks the gimmick chair into pieces. He pulls off a sharp edge of one of the legs. He does the deal where he teases he's going to jab Tully in the eye with the sharp piece of wood. Reverse that. Tully is teasing that he's going to jab Magnum with the wood. And they're tussling on the mat. Magnum's trying to hold back Tully, and eventually Magnum gains possession of the gimmick. Crowd's going absolutely ballistic at this point. And showing zero acts of kindness or remorse, Magnum digs this piece of wood into Tully's eye. Tully's screaming in agony. He's refusing to give up at first, but in the end, the pain's too much to withstand, and Tully screams, yes, yes, and translation, quitting. And crowd goes ape shit. They have this fantastic post-match angle with Magnum teasing that he's going to give one final blow to Tully to put him out for good, but realizes he's won. It's not worth it, and he spares Tully the lethal shot at the end. Fuck, this match is phenomenal. I can't say enough good things about it, people. If you have never seen it, like, you need to go watch it. Whether it's on the Cock or whether it's YouTube or some other streaming service, go out of your way to watch this I Quit Cage match. Like I said, it's easily one of the best cage matches I've ever seen. And in terms of, like, pure story and drama, it's absolute perfection. You know, I'm sure Meltzer would give it something like 3 3/4 because it didn't happen in the Tokyo Dome and didn't involve the Beta Bucks or Kenny Omega, but this is one of those circumstances where it's just like, fuck Dave's input. This was a 5-star cage match, and just to piss off the Bucks and Omega fans out there, I'm going to throw in an extra 3/4 stars to make it sting. So there you go. Next up was the Atlanta Street fight between the Midnight Express, Jimmy Valiant, and Miss Atlanta Lively. Of course, Jim Cornette and Big Mama in their respective corners. I'm taking this directly from my notes here. 1 minute. We got 1 minute into this match before Dennis Condrey gigged on the outside. And all I can say is that if you are still alive at this point and are participating in this drinking game, take a shot. And if you're feeling really ballsy and you can stomach more shots without getting alcohol poisoning, take 3 more shots for the fact that we had blade jobs from Bobby Eaton, Jimmy Valiant, and Miss Atlanta Lively by the end of this. That's right. They even gigged the drag queen. Anyway. Look, I love Jim Cornette. I listen to his podcast all the time, and he's a true wrestling historian and still has a great mind for the business today. He and I think very much alike in terms of what we feel constitutes great wrestling. This was not one of them. In fact, watching this play out, I almost kind of felt embarrassed for Cornette. Because, like, I'm sitting there watching this whole comedy deal play out, and the only thing I can think the entire time it's happening is, this is the exact same kind of shit that Cornette and I bitch and complain about exposing the business today. Like, the only defense that I can give this match over the stupid shit we see in the business today is that at least this kind of comedy back then was backed with something resembling moves and holds at certain points. Like, I mean, I can't say the same holds true for 2021, but like between the Midnight Express doing this match in tuxedos, watching Ronnie Garvin dressed in drag, and spoiler alert, people, I know I've been holding off on that one for a while, but yes, in fact, Miss Atlanta Lively was Ron Garvin dressed as a woman. And God bless Jimmy Valiant, but I mean, he wasn't exactly a spring chicken at this point in his career either. And yes, I understand they ended up doing this so they could give Valiant a big pay-per-view spot, but try to cover up for the fact that he just really couldn't go in the ring anymore. And, I mean, the smoke and mirrors thing, you kind of were going in expecting it to be that, and it just didn't work. You know, there's a point in this match where the ref just took what I wrote down as a random flip bump. I have no idea what happened. All I remember is there's 4 dudes in the ring doing shit. There's powder being thrown around. Everyone's trying to strip each other down to their underwear. And out of the corner of my eye, I just see the ref take a flip bump. I don't know what caused this. I don't know if he was shoved or, for all I know, maybe he just went into business for himself. But it was just a complete outlaw clusterfuck. And it sucked. There's no other way to really bluntly put it. And I have never heard Cornette talk extensively about this Starrcade 85 match. You know, I know he had a tremendous amount of respect for Jimmy Valiant and Ron Garvin, but I'm sure even if he's not willing to admit it outright, deep down he probably knew this match sucked. You know, and I was a big fan of the Midnight Express growing up, and same with Cornette, but yeah, not so much this particular match. I really don't have much more to say about it, so I'll just move on. Not one of the Midnight Express brighter moments, but you know, their career was only an upward trajectory from this point, or trajectory. We had Ivan and Nikita Kolov taking on the Rock and Roll Express for the World Tag Team Championships inside the cage. And I wrote this down, but I will note that this is a sheer attempt at bringing some humor to the show. As someone who actually read about the history of the Soviet Union and understands the true horrors and atrocities of the communist regimes, I do not advocate or stand for anything that regime resembled or stood for. That said, the Soviet national anthem, not a bad tune. Anyway, you know, in comparison to the previous tag matches, this is like watching Midnight Express wrestling the Fantastics. But it was solid. It's not easy to do tag matches inside cages, and honestly, I've never been a particular fan of it. Quite frankly, off the top of my head, I cannot think of a tag team cage match that I've ever seen that I would quantify as good. Juice jobs in this match from Gibson and Ivan, for those keeping track at home. So what are we up to now? Like 13, 14? Completely lost count by now. We did get a pretty major gaffe in here, though, both with the booking and commentary. Because Tony's making mention of the fact that both guys technically don't have to adhere to the rules inside this cage match since it's no DQ. To which my first response is, so why are guys tagging in and out then? Like, if it's no DQ, why aren't all 4 guys in the ring utilizing tornado rules? That also begs the question of, why were there rope breaks in this no DQ anything goes cage match? Beats me. Looking past that, everything they did was fine. Of course, we had a ref bump in the match. I'd volunteer for a side drinking game, but I think by this point in the show, the blood job shots are perfectly adequate. But things ended up breaking down once the ref was down. Nikita came in and decked Gibson with a sickle, but Ivan couldn't get the pin because the ref was trying to get back to his feet. And right at the end, Gibson reaches out to tag Morton as Ivan goes to whip him off the ropes. And as Gibson takes the back body drop, Morton comes in from behind, rolls up Ivan, and gets the pin out of nowhere. Crowd went nuts for that finish, too. And I can't even begin to explain to you the absolute sheer comedy of watching Ricky Morton celebrate this victory by running face first into the side of the cage. You have to see it to believe it. It is amazing. I don't know if he just forgot that they were inside of a cage, or if he was just so excited about the win he'd figured, I'm just going to celebrate by giving myself a grade A concussion. Either way, it is phenomenally side-splitting. I don't think I've ever laughed so hard watching a Rock and Roll Express match ever. And like I said, crowd goes nuts for the finish, but the heels get the post-match attack on the faces. Morton ends up taking a really scary-looking bump over the cage to the outside floor, which, looking back, I'm not exactly sure what he was going for. He just kind of started climbing the cage, to which I presume he was either attempting to dive off onto the heels, or maybe he just figured, sorry, Rob, you're on your own with this one. Good luck. But they end up beating down Gibson, laying him out with the Russian chain. They give him a double-team top rope sickle, and that is about the point where they finally broke through the cage door and Geeks ran out for the save. Like I said, wonky rules aside, very good tag match. Ricky and Robert are over like wildfire by this point, so you pretty much knew anything they were going to do was going to get a reaction. And as mentioned, the title change got one of the biggest pops of the entire night, aside from the main event finish. Good stuff. And with that said, that brings us to our main event, speaking of such. Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship. And obviously the setup to this, for those of you that don't recall, Flair and the Andersons broke Dusty's ankle a few months back, putting him on the shelf. Kayfabe. And Dusty was working to make his big comeback at the Starrcade event to avenge his longtime rival. And they kind of added a layered story around this point where the announcers were taking Flair to task about how they were seeing a different heel side of him. They'd been pointing out that he was acting darker, more unhinged. They were really trying to decipher just how deep-rooted the hatred between him and Dusty goes. So real good stuff in the build-up to this. And obviously a great precursor of what was to come by the end of the year for Flair. And of course, he's Ric Flair, so he's going to fucking bleed it here at some point. And I imagine by this point, you're either fully intoxicated from the blade job shots or your kidneys are on the verge of shutting down entirely, so place your bets if you want to take another one. But you also factor in that Ric Flair's wrestled Dusty 100 times. Much like Flair and Sting, it's pretty much a match that Flair can do in his sleep by this point, so even if I wouldn't say this was an instant classic as far as performance goes, it was still a very good main event title match. And a lot of the match was centered around Flair targeting Dusty's bad ankle. Something the announcers didn't mention here, and I could be wrong going back in the timeline, but wasn't one of the main selling points for this match the fact that the doctors had to create a custom steel-toed boot for Dusty to make sure his ankle didn't swell up? I thought that was one of the side stories they had going in. I don't think Caudle or Shivani ever brought it up. It was weird. And of course, Dusty ends up fighting back on Flair and targeting his ankle for revenge. We had virtually every Flair bump in the book. top rope press, the Flair flop out of the corner, the Irish whip into the corner where he goes upside down and falls off the apron to the outside. Again, both guys are targeting each other's leg, going back and forth with the figure fours. Toward the end, we get, yes, you are correct if you already know what I'm about to say, a ref bump. In fact, one that was so choreographed that you could see it coming a mile away, and it was actually kind of comedic. And that is the point where Ole and Arn ran down for the interference. Dusty ends up taking out Arn, but Ole cuts him off from behind. Flair eventually goes over to cover. Second official runs in, try and count the 3, but Dusty kicks out. And as Flair goes for the body slam, Dusty rolls through for the small package, gets the 3, and as promised, Daddy, we all came to the gathering for one thing. And that was to see Dusty Rhodes become NWA World Heavyweight Champion for the 3rd time. And that is what the fuck we got. And, like I said, it was not either man's best match, but the people came to see Dusty avenge Flair and beat him for the title. In a lot of ways, it's kind of similar to the Full Gear recap I talked about with the Page Omega thing, where, like, even if I may have not been the biggest fan of the build-up to Omega and Page, even if I had a couple things about the matches I can nitpick, I was able to look past it for 2 simple reasons. Number 1, the people bought a ticket to see Page beat Omega clean. And 2, the people bought a ticket to see Page win the world title. Both of which were executed and delivered on. And, of course, after that was the post-celebratory promo with Dusty in the back with all the boys. Everyone's popping champagne bottles. Poor Tony's getting his suit completely drenched in alcohol, but, what can you do? And, then they do the closing statements before doing a brief recap of the pay-per-view, and they do the special thanks, special tributes, and all that. And that was Starrcade 85. One of the very first pay-per-views I had seen as a youngling with family, and going back and watching again, it was quite a thrill ride. And, of course, if you watch my recaps before, I don't do star ratings or overall shows for grade or overall show grades. But, if you ask me to give some kind of artificial rating or general grade, I honestly don't know, because I guess I'm a little biased, considering this was one of the first wrestling memories as a child I had, and it really was a catalyst to launch my love and passion for the business. Looking back with modern eyes and ears, understanding how the business has evolved since then, and trying to grade things on a scale from a 1985 viewership experience versus a 2021 retread, I honestly don't know. I will say outright, the I Quit Cage match is a must-see for every wrestling fan out there, no matter what kind of style you're into. It held up as an instant classic in 1985, and I think it still holds up as an instant classic in 2021. I would highly encourage you to watch that match for sure. Definitely check out the main event. The cage match with the Russians and the Rock and Roll. Maybe you want to go back and watch that one. Maybe I'd throw in the Terry Taylor Buddy Landell if you're looking for just strict professional wrestling entertainment. The rest of the show is just kind of a pick your battle scenario. I would highly encourage you to skip over the Atlanta Street fight to preserve your sanity, but, aside from that, nothing else on the show was embarrassingly bad or wretchedly awful. A couple clunkers here and there, but I thoroughly enjoyed going back and watching this event in full again. With that said, that'll bring closure to this one. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you want to stay posted for all future FSWR content, make sure you come back and check out the show each Monday and Friday. Important to subscribe, comment, and rate. And while you subscribe, make sure you have the bell icon turned on to stay notified of all posts when they go up. And we'll be back this coming Friday for the AEW Dynamite Report. as well as the continuation of our retro series where we look at the fallout to Starrcade 85, and we take a look at where the stories progress for the World Championship Wrestling going into 1986. And we will also keep delving further into the story of Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair for the NWA World's title with World Class. And we'll see which Von Erich member is challenging Kabuki next. Until then, take care, everyone. Peace out.